He saw me broken, said I was his everything, stayed like a bandage over every wound. But when I finally smiled again, he started to break me all over. But then, I turned every piece of his joy into the pain that had once burned me alive. He saw me on a day I had nothing left. Not even tears. Not even the strength to fake a smile. Just an empty shell, sitting at the edge of a hospital bed, watching the last person who had ever truly loved me slip into silence. My mother, my only family, was gone, and with her, every ounce of warmth in my world. I didn't have friends. I didn't have anyone who'd even notice if I vanished that very night. But he did. Ethan. He noticed. I didn't remember much of that evening, just the sterile scent of disinfectant, the buzz of flickering lights above, and the crushing weight of solitude. Until his voice cut through the numbness like a warm blanket on cold skin. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside me like I was some delicate thing that might shatter with even a whisper. And I had already shattered. Every part of me was in pieces. I remember blinking up at him, stunned that someone had even seen me, that someone had cared enough to ask. And he didn't leave, not then, not after. He sat with me, talked to me, took me out for coffee 2 days later, when I hadn't eaten in 48 hours. He made me laugh, made me feel human again. He made promises without saying the words. And I started believing in something I thought had died with my mother. Hope. He told me, "You're not alone anymore. I'm here. You're everything to me now." I didn't know how much I needed to hear that. Until I did. And suddenly, I was holding on to those words like a lifeline. Ethan became the one person I trusted. The only one who saw through the darkness and didn't flinch. And he didn't try to fix me overnight. No. He stayed like a bandage, gentle, soft, comforting, covering wounds instead of ripping them open. He made me feel safe, and safety was something I hadn't known in years. I let him in. Slowly. Carefully. Like learning how to breathe again after nearly drowning. And as days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, I started to smile. For real. And that's when everything began to shift. That's when the cracks started forming again. But this time, they didn't come from the outside world. They came from him. From the one person I had trusted to help me heal. For a while, Ethan was everything. He cooked for me when I forgot to eat. He held me during panic attacks, whispered calming words when I woke up screaming from the past. He reminded me to breathe, to try, to live. I told myself I was lucky. That maybe, just maybe, the universe had finally given me something good. I had no way of knowing I was being studied, not loved. That every moment of vulnerability I shared was being stored like bullets in a hidden arsenal. Because he didn't just listen, he memorized. My childhood nightmares. The fear of abandonment that gripped me in silence. The way I flinched at raised voices. The names of people who'd hurt me. The fact that I hated being left unread, because it reminded me of all the times people had walked away and never returned. He never forgot. At first, it felt like love. Who else would care so deeply? Who else would remember even the smallest things that hurt me and go out of their way to avoid them? I mistook attention for affection, control for care. He became my constant, my comfort, and then, my cage. It started with little things. He'd say, "You don't need anyone else. I'm here, aren't I?" Or, "Why would you talk to people who never cared when you were at your worst?" And I'd nod thinking he was right. Because he had been there. No one else had. One by one, I stopped replying to old friends. I missed a few shifts at work because he said I looked tired. And when I mentioned wanting to start therapy, he tilted his head and smiled like it was cute. "But I already know everything about you. You don't need someone else poking around in your head." I laughed. At the time, I thought he was joking. But he wasn't. And slowly, the very person who had healed my wounds began to poke at them, just to see how deep they went. There were days when he'd be cold, distant, ignoring me without a word. The same Ethan who once texted me good morning and good night without fail would disappear for hours, then days. When I asked what was wrong, he'd say I was being needy. When I cried, he called me dramatic. When I tried to explain how it made me feel, he said I was too broken to understand real love. And that's when I saw it. He wasn't holding me together anymore. He was pulling me apart, one stitch at a time. The man who once cradled my pain had learned exactly how to twist it. And still, I stayed. Because when someone saves you from drowning, you don't expect them to be the one who drags you back underwater. Healing is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself in grand gestures or sudden transformations. It's subtle, like waking up one day and realizing the ache in your chest isn't quite as heavy as it used to be. Like hearing a song that once gutted you and being able to breathe through it. And for a while, I thought I was healing. I smiled again, not just for show, but because I felt it somewhere deep, buried under the rubble. I started to find joy in things that once felt pointless. Baking on Sunday mornings, journaling, painting little canvases that I never showed anyone but Ethan. I was rebuilding, brick by cautious brick. And I remember the day it happened. The day I felt truly proud of myself. I had just come back from a job interview. My first one in nearly a year. I was nervous, scared even, but I had gone. I had pushed through the shaking hands, the racing heart, the voice in my head that kept whispering you'll fail. But I did it. I walked into our apartment, face glowing, heart light, and I said, Ethan, I think I nailed it. My voice trembled with excitement. My eyes were lit with hope. He didn't even look up from his phone. A smirk played on his lips, one I couldn't read at the time, but looking back now, I know what it meant. It was the smile of someone who had just watched their puppet cut one of the strings. You think you're ready for that? He said casually. You can't even handle being alone for more than a few hours without panicking. The air left my lungs. I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off. That's not fair, Ethan. I've been doing better. He glanced up then, eyes cold and clinical. You've been pretending better. There's a difference. That was the moment. The first time I saw it, the shift. That was when I realized he wasn't happy for me. He was threatened by me. Because if I healed, if I stood on my own, I wouldn't need him anymore. And Ethan needed to be needed. Desperately. Obsessively. His love wasn't about me. It was about the power he felt in being the only one I relied on. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a dependent. So, when I started to smile, when I began reaching for pieces of a life that didn't orbit around him, he panicked. But not the way normal people do. Not with fear. With control. With manipulation. With calculated cruelty. Suddenly, everything I did was wrong. If I wore makeup, I was trying too hard. If I stayed late at work, I was probably with someone else. If I cried, I was playing victim. He made me question everything, every thought, every feeling, every step forward. I stopped painting. He said it was childish. I stopped journaling. He said it was narcissistic. I even stopped going to therapy after my first session because he made it a fight every time I left the house. He was careful. Subtle. He never yelled, never hit. That would have been too obvious. No. He preferred the slow erosion of who I was. Death by 1,000 little dismissals. He told me no one else would ever love me with all my issues. He told me I was lucky someone as patient as him stayed. He reminded me often of how he picked me up when no one else would. And worst of all, I believed him. Because when you've already been broken once, it's easy to mistake the hand rearranging your pieces for one that's helping. But I was starting to see. Slowly, painfully, I was beginning to realize that the pain I was in now wasn't the leftover wreckage of my past. It was the present. It was him. And even though I didn't want to admit it yet, a part of me knew. The man who had once dried my tears was now the reason I cried myself to sleep. The man who once whispered, "I'll never leave you," was the one making me wish he would. I was no longer healing. I was bleeding again. But this time, I wasn't broken the same way. This time, I still had pieces of myself he hadn't found yet, parts he hadn't ruined. And I started hiding them. My laughter, my hope, my rage. Because part of me knew, if I was going to survive this, I had to pretend again. Just like I did before he found me. I had to let him believe I was still his puppet. Still his fragile little thing. Because when he finally broke me all over again, I would be ready. Not to cry, but to burn. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so cruel, so clever. Ethan didn't come at me with fists or screams. No, he used silence as a weapon. Smirks as knives. Words that wrapped around my throat so gently, I didn't realize I was suffocating until I couldn't speak at all. I began shrinking in our home. His home? Really? He made sure I remembered that. He started leaving without telling me where he was going. He used to text me 3 times in an hour. Now, I'd wait 6 and get one cold message. Busy. Don't be clingy. Then came the comparisons. I mean, look at Anna. She's confident. She knows what she wants. She doesn't cry every time things get hard. She's not stuck in the past like you. Anna. His coworker. His friend. The name started popping up in casual conversations, on his phone screen, in the background of his jokes. She laughed at his stories. She complimented his ideas. She was everything I wasn't, at least in the version of reality he created and kept throwing in my face. I told myself I was overthinking it, that my trauma was making me paranoid. But that's what happens when someone makes you feel like your instincts are lies and your pain is a problem. Every time I voiced concern, I was jealous. Every time I cried, I was starting drama. Every time I begged him to be honest, he called me pathetic. And yet, I stayed. Not because I was weak. Because I was still clinging to the version of him that had once sat beside me in a hospital waiting room, stroking my hand and telling me I wasn't alone. I thought maybe if I loved him harder, he'd become that Ethan again. But that Ethan was a mask. This one, the cold, calculating, dismissive man who watched me unravel without flinching, this was who he really was. And he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the control, the dependency, the way I jumped at every mood swing like a dog trained to flinch at raised hands. There was one night I'll never forget. It was raining, one of those heavy, punishing storms that seemed to echo everything I was feeling. I had cooked dinner, waited, texted him, called him. No response. He came home at midnight, drenched and laughing at something on his phone. I stood there in the doorway, trembling. Where were you? He didn't even look up. Just walked past me, tossing his wet coat on the couch. I was out. I don't need to check in like I'm a child. My voice cracked. You could have just said something. I was worried. He turned then. Not with rage. Not with guilt. With amusement. You're always worried. That's the problem. You live in fear and expect me to babysit your emotions. I opened my mouth to argue, to explain that it wasn't about control, it was about respect. About not being left in the dark like I didn't matter. But I didn't speak, because his smile was already victorious. And in that silence, he knew he had won. He went to bed. I sat at the kitchen table until 3 a.m., staring at the untouched food I'd made, wondering how someone who once swore they'd protect me could now be the reason I was slowly disappearing. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't love. It never was. This was a game. He had seen me broken and chosen me because I was easy to mold. Easy to twist. Easy to bend into something dependent on his approval. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Not completely. Beneath the layers of manipulation, behind the hollow eyes and quiet nods, there was something else growing. Not weakness. Not fear. Fire. I started pretending. Again. Smiling when he insulted me. Laughing when he mentioned Anna. Apologizing when he hurt me. He thought he was winning again. What he didn't know was, I was gathering every shattered part of myself he left on the floor. Silently. Carefully. preparing. He had taught me pain. He had shown me how to suffer quietly. But he had also taught me how to watch, how to study, how to wait for the perfect moment. And it was coming. Because I wasn't going to run. I was going to end him. Piece by carefully planned piece. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But mine simmered in silence. Boiled beneath my skin while I wore a mask he thought he had carved himself. I had given Ethan access to every corner of my soul, and he thought it made me weak. He never considered that it also gave me access to his. Every password. Every routine. Every lie he thought I hadn't noticed. I tucked it all away, behind my quiet nods and deadpan expressions. Because now, I wasn't surviving. I was studying. The way he always left his laptop unlocked when he went to shower. The way he silenced his phone at night but forgot about the cloud backup syncing every text message. I stopped reacting to Anna's name because I already knew. They weren't just friends. They weren't just coworkers. They were lovers in secret, or so they thought. But Ethan's arrogance made him sloppy. He never expected the broken girl he'd conditioned to obey to also be capable of betrayal. Oh, but I was. I stopped crying in the shower. I stopped waiting by the door. I started pretending again, but not the kind of pretending that kept me trapped. This time, I was pretending for war. Step 1. I collected evidence. Quietly. Coldly. Every message. Every late night plan. Every lie he whispered to Anna while I sat in the other room, listening through the paper-thin walls. He told her I was unstable, that he was trying to find a way out. Funny. He didn't know I was holding the exit wide open for him, straight into hell. Step 2. I started separating myself from him financially. Small transfers at first. Changing passwords. Gathering documents he never paid attention to, leases, bills, insurance policies. He had insisted I leave my job. So we could build a future together, he said. Really, it was so I wouldn't have my own income. But he forgot I was smarter than he gave me credit for. I got a remote side gig. Opened an account he didn't know about. Transferred money in bits. Little by little. And he never noticed. Because he had stopped seeing me. I was no longer a person to him. I was an accessory to his ego. Something he used to validate himself, then tossed aside when I became inconvenient. Step 3. I waited. I waited for the perfect moment. And it came sooner than I thought. One night, I overheard him planning a weekend away with Anna. He told her I'd be out of town visiting my sister. A sister he knew I hadn't spoken to in months. But I played along. That night, I cooked his favorite meal. Wore his favorite dress. Poured his wine. He didn't even question it. Just smiled, leaned back, and said, "See? When you stop being difficult, we're perfect." And I smiled back, my stomach turning. Because I had just emailed the screenshots to myself and to Anna. All of them. Every lie. Every manipulation. Every moment he told her I was a burden while sleeping in my bed, under my roof, on the pillow I used to cry into every night. He didn't know yet. But he would. And it wouldn't stop there. Because hurting me wasn't enough for him. He needed to ruin me. Slowly. Quietly. Without ever looking like the villain. So that's exactly what I was going to do to him. I started dropping hints to friends. People he never cared to impress. Planted seeds. Subtle things. So when everything came crashing down, it would make sense to them. They would say, "Oh, that explains so much." And I knew Ethan. He was obsessed with his image. With being seen as the charming, generous, thoughtful man. The one who rescued a broken girl and tried his best to love her. But soon, they would all see who he really was. And best of all, he would still have no idea it was coming. Because he thought I was still drowning. What he didn't know was, I had learned how to swim in the poison he poured into me. And I was coming for him with a calmness that would make the fire burn even colder. He broke me. And now, Now I was sharpening the pieces. The weekend came fast. Ethan packed his overnight bag with a whistle on his lips, claiming a work retreat. He didn't even bother hiding it anymore. That was the level of confidence he had in my silence. I kissed him goodbye with a smile. He smiled back, touching my cheek like he owned it. "I'll call you when I get there," he lied. I nodded. Then I locked the door behind him, and I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table where I had once begged him to love me right. Where I had waited hours for answers that never came. Where I had cried over cold dinners and colder stares. I opened my laptop and pressed send. The email went to Anna. Not anonymously. No, that would have been too easy. It came from me, with my name, my face, and a subject line that simply read, "The truth you deserve." Screenshots, voicemails, calendar entries, passwords, messages where he played us both, told her I was unstable, told me he was overworked, told her I was hanging by a thread, and told me she was just a friend. I knew Anna wasn't innocent. She knew I existed. But still, I wanted her to see how little she actually meant to him. Because he lied to everyone. Even her. I wanted her to see the monster she'd shared her bed with. I didn't expect forgiveness from her. I expected shock. And I got it. By the time Ethan reached his destination, I got the first text from Anna. "What kind of sick game has he been playing?" Followed by, "I'm done with him." I swear to God. But that was only part of the fall. Because the real damage was waiting back home. The next morning, I called his workplace, pretending to be a concerned partner. I told HR I found messages where Ethan had referred to female colleagues in derogatory terms. That I was worried he was manipulating someone he supervised. I didn't need them to fire him immediately. I just needed them to start watching him. He thrived in places where people thought he was kind. Untouchable. But suspicion was a seed that grew fast. Especially in the cracks of a polished mask. By Sunday night, Ethan came home early. And furious. He slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. "What the hell did you do?" I looked up from the couch, calm. "You'll have to be more specific." He stormed toward me, phone in hand. "Anna blocked me. She sent me everything you sent her." "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, rising slowly. "I think this is overdue." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think this changes anything? You're nothing without me. You don't have a job, no one believes you, and—" "I do have a job," I cut in. "I started working 2 months ago. Remote. Pays well. I've been saving." His mouth opened. Closed. "I've also spoken to a lawyer," I continued. "I know my rights. I've got proof of your infidelity and emotional abuse. I've backed it all up. Legally, financially, I'm not stuck anymore." He stepped back like I'd slapped him. "You played the wrong game, Ethan," I said, stepping forward. "You should have left me broken. That was your only advantage. You're bluffing." "No. I just learned from the best. You taught me how to lie with a smile. How to pretend. How to wait. And now, you're going to learn what it feels like to lose everything slowly, like I did." He tried to speak, but I was already walking past him. I didn't need to scream. The silence was loud enough. Because from that moment on, everything he touched turned to ash. Anna told mutual friends what he did. His story started unraveling. Work HR launched a quiet investigation. He was placed on review. I moved out a week later. Clean. Quiet. Gone. And he was left in the ruins he built himself. All his control? Gone. All his carefully constructed lies? Exposed. His image? Cracked. And I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. He was crumbling on his own. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because I hadn't touched the one thing he valued most. His joy. Ethan always thought his joy came from control. From being worshipped. From being needed. But the real source of his joy? His reputation. That image he curated so carefully, the nice guy, the rescuer, the charming partner who stood by a broken woman. He wore it like armor, and everyone believed it. Until I shattered the mirror he admired himself in. I didn't just expose his infidelity. I exposed his pattern. I reached out to a few women I'd met at his old job, ones he used to speak about with condescension. Just gentle messages, curious, supportive, no accusations. And it turned out, I wasn't the first he had broken under the guise of saving. There were others. One had left the company without explanation. Another had quietly transferred departments. Another had once told HR something, but dropped it when Ethan spun the story in his favor. But now, with my proof, with others stepping forward, that power he used to wield so easily, it became a curse around his neck. He didn't get fired, not yet. But the cold shoulders, the whispered meetings, the polite but suspicious glances, they were far worse to a man like him. Ethan didn't fear being caught. He feared being seen. And now, people were seeing him. I saw the cracks when he tried to smile at neighbors and they didn't smile back. When friends stopped replying to group chats. When even his mother asked why Anna had blocked her. He still tried to reach out to me. Messages. Calls. Voicemails that started angry, then turned desperate, then pleading. Please just talk to me. We can fix this. Fix? I was never the one who broke it. But I didn't respond. Because I had nothing left to say. And silence? It ate him alive. I watched from afar as he slowly unraveled. Not because I still cared, but because I needed to know he felt everything I once did. The isolation. The paranoia. The slow burn of realizing no one was on your side. But the final blow, that came on the anniversary of the day he first told me he loved me. I posted a piece online. An essay. Anonymous, but detailed enough that anyone who knew us could recognize the truth. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't vulgar. It was honest. It was the story of a woman who mistook manipulation for love. Of how abuse isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet. Soft. Gentle. Even. But it still leaves bruises, just not the kind you can see. It went viral. Not instantly, but slowly. It was shared, quoted, commented on. People reached out. Women said it gave them courage to leave. Others said they knew someone like the man in the story. And Ethan? He couldn't prove it was about him. But he knew. And so did everyone else. That essay took what little dignity he had left and drowned it in truth. He posted vague messages about being misunderstood, about how some people twist your kindness, but no one defended him. Because by now, his name had become a whisper people didn't trust. His joy had always come from admiration. Now, even his own shadow looked away from him. And me? I had rebuilt. Quietly. Fully. I moved to a new apartment. Got promoted. Made new friends. Real friends. Ones who didn't see me as broken or in progress. Just me. I smiled again, but this time for myself. No one told me how healing would feel. I thought it would be loud. Triumphant. Screaming on rooftops. But it wasn't. It was a quiet morning with sunlight on my face and no weight on my chest. It was laughter that didn't carry guilt. A dinner where I didn't flinch when someone raised their voice. A moment where I looked in the mirror and didn't search for who I used to be. Ethan had wanted to keep me beneath him forever. Instead, I stood taller than he ever imagined. Because when he shattered me, he didn't realize I was made of pieces that knew how to come back sharper. But the final piece of revenge? That was still waiting. Because I hadn't shown him yet what it meant to live a life without peace. That came next. I never touched him again. Not his name. Not his life. Not his world. But I didn't need to. Because I had already planted the one thing he could never run from: doubt. Now, everywhere he went, People looked at him just a little too long. Every kindness was questioned. Every compliment second-guessed. His new relationships didn't last. Not because I interfered, but because the truth always echoes louder in silence. And for Ethan, silence had become a cage he couldn't escape. I never watched him fall apart completely. I didn't have to. I had already taken the only thing he truly valued. The version of himself he showed the world. That shiny, perfect illusion? Gone. Now, when people looked at him, they didn't see a hero. They saw a man who once held a broken woman, only to crush her when she dared to heal. And me? I walked away whole. Because revenge wasn't about ruining him. It was about reclaiming me.